All right. So, we're always on the lookout for interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And you sent over this audio about, environmental issues,
Yeah,
big challenges
definitely.
facing the planet. So we thought we could take a look at it together, highlight some of the things that stood out. There's a lot there
Oh, yeah, it's a big topic.
to cover.
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
everything from like climate change to different kinds of pollution to, forests disappearing and what happens when we lose all those different types of plants and animals. But I think we can break it down, make it easy to understand.
Yeah, I think the good thing is it gave a really good overview,
It did.
so I think we could jump off from there
Right, yeah.
and really get into some specifics.
Yeah, our goal is like to help you really grasp, these global issues
Yeah.
and all the words people use to talk about them, if I'm getting too lost in the weeds.
Yeah, because when you start to think about it, you realize that a lot of these things are connected. And I think the audio did a good job of laying that out. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with climate change?
Okay.
Because that seems to be kind of at the root of a lot of this.
Sure.
It's like the audio explained, the basic science is pretty clear, right? Our activities, burning oil and gas, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That releases gases that trap heat, and that's what's causing the planet to warm up.
Okay. So, think about it this way, right? It's not like this nice gradual warming that's happening.
Yeah.
Like the audio talked about some of the, the knock-on effects, right? So like things heat up, ice caps melt faster.
Yeah.
That water goes into the oceans, sea levels rise.
Yeah, and that's already happening.
Yeah, and I remember they talked about those extreme weather events,
Yeah, like those hurricanes,
Yeah.
those droughts.
Yeah, that's what like messes with people's lives, the natural world,
Absolutely.
The whole balance gets thrown off.
And what's fascinating is that you have these feedback loops.
Right.
So, for instance, as the ice melts,
Yeah.
there's less white surface to reflect the sunlight back out into space.
Oh, right.
So the planet actually absorbs even more heat.
Wow.
And that makes the warming even faster.
Like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And these extreme weather events,
Yeah.
they aren't just, one-offs.
Right.
They can have huge impacts on agriculture,
Right.
on infrastructure,
Yeah.
even on like political stability
Wow.
in parts of the world that are already struggling.
Yeah. So, one thing leads to another, and that
Yeah.
kind of takes us to deforestation, right?
Yeah.
Which the audio talked about next.
Yeah.
And you can immediately see like how it all connects.
Absolutely.
Forests, these big, huge natural sponges for carbon dioxide, right? Sucking it right out of the atmosphere.
Like nature's air purifiers.
Yeah. And when we cut them down.
Yeah, you're not just getting rid of that carbon sink,
Right.
but the actual process of cutting them down, especially when they're burned,
Yeah.
releases all that stored carbon back into the air.
It's like a double whammy.
Yeah, like a 1-2 punch.
Yeah. And think about it, like these forests are these complex ecosystems, right?
Yeah.
They're home to tons of different species.
Right.
So when they're gone, that's a ton of habitat lost.
It's devastating.
Yeah. And, the audio mentioned how it's not just like an environmental thing.
Yeah.
For indigenous communities around the world, forests are tied to their culture,
Yeah,
livelihoods, their whole way of life.
absolutely. It's part of their identity.
Yeah. So when those forests are gone, it's like this huge cultural loss.
Exactly.
Makes you think,
It does.
different values.
Long-term consequences.
Yeah, it really raises the question
Yeah.
of how do you balance those short-term economic needs
Right.
with, the long-term health of the planet
Exactly.
and the well-being of these communities.
Yeah, the audio seemed to be saying that, protecting these forests,
Yeah.
it's not just an environmental thing.
And
It's like
social.
it's cultural benefits too.
Mm-hmm.
It's everything.
Yeah. All right. So next up, they talked about pollution,
Right.
broke it down into a couple of key types.
Yeah.
Plastic pollution first.
Yeah, you see those pictures all the time.
Oh, yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and the audio really highlighted how it harms all those creatures in the sea,
Yeah.
rivers, oceans.
Yeah, it's really impacting our waterways.
Yeah.
And you know what's crazy about plastic is just how much there is
It's everywhere.
and how long it lasts.
I know.
Those single-use plastics we use for like 5 minutes,
Yeah.
those things can stay in the environment for hundreds of years.
It's wild.
And, in that time, they could be eaten by marine animals
Right.
who mistake them for food,
Yeah.
or they can get tangled up in them.
Yeah.
And often, it's fatal.
It's so sad.
It is.
And it's not just like the big pieces you see floating around.
Yeah.
The audio talked about microplastics.
Right.
Those teeny tiny bits of plastic that come from bigger pieces breaking down.
Yeah, and those are turning up everywhere.
Right. Yeah, and now they're in our food, our water.
I know, it's pretty disturbing.
Yeah, it's like a little unsettling when you think about, what that could mean for our health down the road.
Yeah, I mean, the research is still ongoing.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're so widespread, I mean, you find them in seafood, bottled water.
Right.
It definitely raises some concerns.
Yeah, and it really underlines why we need to cut back on single-use plastics.
Yeah.
It's not just about keeping the oceans clean.
Right.
It's about our own health, too.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then they moved on to air pollution.
Yeah.
This one can be a little harder to wrap your head around.
I know, because you can't always see it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just as serious.
Yeah, and the audio made that very clear.
Yeah.
They talked about the usual suspects, factories spewing out fumes.
Right, cars on the road.
Yeah, burning trash.
All adding nasty stuff into the air.
Yeah, and breathing that polluted air.
Yeah.
It's not good.
No.
It can trigger all sorts of respiratory problems like asthma.
Yeah, and over time, it can contribute to some pretty serious lung diseases.
So it's a major public health problem.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
especially in cities where pollution levels tend to be higher.
And it's not just our lungs.
No.
The audio talked about how it can damage crops,
Yeah.
which affects food production.
Right.
And even wear away at buildings over time.
It's wild.
Yeah, so it's got these broader economic and environmental costs,
Exactly.
beyond just human health.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, so the main message there seemed to be that we really need to cut those emissions,
Yeah.
move towards cleaner ways of producing energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, shifting to renewable energy,
Yeah.
putting stricter rules on what industries can release into the atmosphere.
Right.
Those are essential steps
Yeah.
making the air cleaner.
Okay, so another really important issue they talked about was water scarcity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy for some of us to take clean water for granted.
Yeah, I know. We just turn on the tap.
Right. But the audio pointed out that there are so many parts of the world dealing with serious shortages
Yeah.
and, limited access to safe drinking water.
And it's a growing problem.
Yeah, what's interesting is that it's not always just about how much rain falls in a place.
Right. It's a combination of things.
Yeah.
Some regions naturally get less rain, but it's also about how we manage the water.
Right.
We do have
Right.
things like inefficient irrigation in agriculture, polluting our water sources.
Yeah.
And then there's climate change,
Right.
which is messing with rainfall patterns.
Yeah, so it's like a multi-layered problem.
Yeah.
But the audio did offer some hope with potential solutions.
Yeah.
Water conservation was a big one.
Absolutely.
Just, being smarter about how we use water, fixing leaky pipes, using water-efficient appliances.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but when you think about how many people there are,
Yeah.
how much water we use,
It adds up.
it can make a difference.
Yeah, and then on a bigger scale, governments, they need to invest in sustainable water management strategies.
Absolutely.
Things like, improving those irrigation techniques for farming, capturing rainwater more effectively.
Mm.
And then in some cases looking into, technologies like water recycling desalination
Yeah.
to increase the supply.
And those can be game changers.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about waste management.
All right.
Something we're all involved in every day.
Every single day.
The audio pointed out those obvious problems that happen when we don't handle our trash the right way.
Yeah.
Especially, how it can contaminate land and water.
Absolutely. If waste isn't disposed of properly, especially in places without good infrastructure,
Yeah.
it can create breeding grounds for disease,
Right.
pollute vital natural resources.
So that's why it's so important to have effective waste management practices.
Yeah, things like recycling and composting,
Right.
those are crucial.
And the audio really stressed that it's not just about technology,
Yeah.
it's about education.
Yeah.
Getting people to change their habits over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If people understand why recycling matters,
Right.
why it's important to dispose of their waste responsibly, they're more likely to do it.
So it's about raising awareness, empowering people
Yes, it
with
will.
the knowledge and the tools
Yeah.
to manage their waste responsibly.
Yeah. And that's how you create cleaner, healthier communities.
Okay, let's talk about biodiversity loss.
Okay.
Another big concern that they talked about in the audio,
Yeah.
they explained how destroying habitats
Yeah.
through things like deforestation, building cities, the effects of climate change,
Yeah.
it's causing species to go extinct at a scary rate.
It is. I mean, it's happening much faster than it should.
Right. And what's important to remember is that each species, it plays a role in this big web of life.
Yeah. It's all interconnected.
Yeah. And when we lose species,
Yeah.
it can destabilize those ecosystems.
Right.
Lead to all sorts of, unforeseen consequences.
It's like pulling a thread from a
Yeah.
tapestry. Right. Eventually, the whole thing can unravel.
The audio used the example of bees, which really hit home for me.
I know, it's a good one.
Those little guys are so important for pollinating crops.
Yeah.
And if their numbers keep going down, it could seriously threaten our ability to grow food.
Right. That's a perfect example of how connected everything is.
Right.
The decline of bees isn't just about losing bees.
Yeah.
It impacts our food security.
It affects everything.
It does.
The audio talked about creating protected areas.
Yeah, like national parks.
Yeah.
Wildlife reserves.
Yeah, to safeguard habitats.
Yeah, those are really important.
And, it's not just about those designated areas. The audio also talked about local communities making a difference.
Yeah.
Planting native plants, creating those green spaces.
Yeah, even in cities.
Right, even in urban areas.
Yeah, to support local wildlife.
It all helps.
Every little bit makes a difference.
Okay, so now let's shift gears a little bit, talk about solutions. The audio spent a good amount of time on renewable energy, framing it as this really important way to tackle a lot of these problems by weaning ourselves off fossil fuels.
Yeah, it's really the key.
What's so cool about renewables, like solar, wind, hydropower, is that they offer this way to generate electricity with much lower greenhouse gas emissions.
Absolutely.
Than burning coal or oil.
Right. And that's obviously critical
in
the fight against climate change.
And if you look at the trends, the cost of solar and wind power has been dropping.
Yeah, it's become much more affordable.
Yeah, making them even more appealing.
Exactly. And the audio pointed out some of the other benefits.
Yeah.
Like how renewable energy is creating jobs.
Right.
Helping local economies grow.
Yeah, because you have to build and maintain those solar farms and wind turbines.
Absolutely, and that requires a workforce.
Right, so it's got those economic benefits.
Yeah, it's not just environmental.
But the audio did say it's not like this simple flip of a switch. Right. There are costs involved in building that infrastructure.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get pushback from those established industries.
Yeah, they don't always want to change.
And that's where, government policies can play a role.
Yeah.
The audio talked about incentives like tax breaks or subsidies to make renewable energy more attractive.
Yeah, to help people overcome those upfront costs.
Right. And, public awareness campaigns.
Yeah, those are important too.
And help encourage people to adopt those clean energy technologies.
Absolutely. Public support, informed consumer choices.
Yeah.
Those are big drivers of change.
When people understand the benefits and demand cleaner energy, that sends a message.
It does.
They also talked about urbanization and how that affects the environment as more people move to cities.
Yeah.
Natural habitats are being turned into developments.
Right.
And cities, they use a lot of energy.
They do.
And produce a lot of waste.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, so it's this complex set of challenges.
It is.
But they did point out that cities can be centers for innovation and efficiency if they're designed the right way.
Yeah, if they're planned well.
And that's where this idea of green urban planning comes in.
Right.
Designing cities with more green spaces, like parks, rooftop gardens, focusing on energy-efficient buildings.
Yeah, and public transportation is a huge part of that.
Right.
Making cities more sustainable.
So investing in those public transit systems, like electric buses, light rail, encouraging walking and cycling.
Yeah, and you need dedicated infrastructure for that.
Right.
To make it safe and convenient.
Yeah, that can really reduce the reliance on cars.
Yeah.
And lower those emissions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sustainable urban development also involves waste management.
Right.
Things like good recycling programs, composting, and even technologies that can turn waste into energy.
It's like turning trash into treasure.
Yeah, exactly.
They also talked about industrialization and its impact on the planet. Factories releasing all sorts of pollutants into the air, the water, the soil.
Yeah.
Which can be really harmful.
Yeah, to ecosystems and human health.
Right. Industrial activity has been this big driver of economic growth.
Yeah, it has.
But historically, it's come with a lot of environmental costs.
It has.
Overuse of resources, habitat destruction, water contamination, waste pollution.
It's a long list.
Yeah. So they stress the need for those strong environmental regulations.
Yeah. We need to hold industries accountable.
And it's not just about government rules.
No.
Businesses need to step up too.
Yeah.
Adopting cleaner production methods, like minimizing waste.
Yeah. Using recycled materials, switching to less toxic chemicals.
And green technology.
Yeah, green technology is becoming more and more important.
Yeah, and there's this really interesting concept that the circular economy,
Yeah.
instead of that lineal take, make, dispose model,
Right.
it's about keeping those resources in use for as long as possible.
Exactly. Get the most out of them.
Yeah.
And then recover and regenerate them at the end of their life.
So it reduces waste,
Yeah,
reliance on virgin resources.
absolutely. It's a much more sustainable approach.
Okay, so the audio also made this really important point about education.
Yes, education is key.
Teaching kids about these issues early on can shape their behavior.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
It's about instilling those values early on.
Right.
So they grow up making responsible choices.
And it's about integrating environmental education into school curriculums at all levels.
Yeah, from elementary school all the way up to university.
Right. And it's not just about learning facts.
No.
It's about those hands-on experiences.
Yeah, getting kids out into nature.
Right.
So they can connect with it.
Yeah. And it's not just for kids.
No.
The audio talked about environmental awareness programs for adults.
Yeah, we all need to keep learning.
Right.
And adapting our habits.
So, it's a continuous process.
Absolutely.
We all need to be engaged.
Yeah, and stay informed.
They also talked about sustainable fashion.
Right.
You might not think about it right away.
Yeah.
But the fashion industry,
Yeah.
it has a big impact.
It does.
The production of clothing uses a lot of water energy and chemicals.
Yeah, and the fast fashion model leads to a huge amount of waste.
Yeah. Clothes ending up in landfills.
Exactly. And sustainable fashion is trying to change that.
So it's about using eco-friendly materials.
Yeah, like organic, cotton recycled fabrics.
Yeah, and ensuring, ethical labor practices.
Absolutely.
And as consumers, we can make a difference.
Yeah.
By supporting brands that are doing things the right way.
Yeah, and by buying fewer, higher quality items that last longer.
Yeah, and the audio even talked about, getting creative with what you already have.
Yeah, like repairing your clothes.
Right.
Upcycling them.
Yeah, giving them a second life.
Yeah, it's a great way to reduce waste.
Okay, so then they moved on to this issue of food waste, pointing out that a huge amount of food that's produced globally just gets tossed.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about it.
It's a lot. And they said about a third of all food produced is wasted.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It is, and it's not just the food itself.
Right.
It's all the resources that went into producing it.
Yeah.
The water, the energy, the land.
And when it decomposes in landfills, it releases methane.
Which is a potent greenhouse gas.
So the food industry has a big environmental footprint.
It does.
And when food is wasted, all that embedded energy is gone.
That's a huge loss.
So the audio talked about addressing food waste on all levels.
Yeah, from farms to households.
Right. So what can we do as individuals?
Well, they had some practical tips.
Yeah.
Like planning your meals better.
Right.
Using leftovers creatively.
Yeah.
Paying attention to those expiration dates.
Yeah.
And there are also programs that connect surplus food with people who need it.
Right.
Which is a great solution.
Yeah. Reducing food waste. A tangible way to make a difference.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the audio also talked about the role of government when it comes to these environmental issues.
Yeah.
They talked about regulations, sustainability goals.
Yeah, those can really drive change.
They mentioned things like carbon pricing, incentives for investing in renewable energy, regulations that restrict harmful chemicals.
Yeah.
Those can create a framework for sustainability.
Absolutely.
And they also stressed international cooperation agreements.
Yeah, for global challenges like climate change.
Yeah, because it's a global problem that requires global solutions.
It does.
But they also said it's not just about making laws.
Right.
It's about enforcing them, holding polluters accountable.
Absolutely.
And they really emphasize, the role of citizens, advocating for stronger protections can really make a difference.
It can.
Informed, engaged public, powerful force for change.
It is.
And then they talked about technology, finding solutions to environmental problems.
Yeah, and there's so many innovations coming out all the time.
Yeah. More efficient renewable energy, ways to clean up pollution, monitor environmental changes.
And that's crucial.
Yeah, technology offers a lot of hope.
It does.
From, advances in renewable energy, energy storage, to more efficient agriculture, waste management.
Yeah, and even artificial intelligence.
Oh, wow.
To help us understand and predict environmental shifts.
That's amazing. So it sounds like we need a multifaceted approach.
Absolutely.
Individuals, governments,
Yeah.
technology innovation,
It's got to be a collaborative effort.
all working together
Yeah.
for a more sustainable future.
Exactly. And, the audio really emphasized that this is a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
Every action we take, no matter how small,
Yeah.
contributes to a larger impact.
So by staying informed,
Yeah.
making those conscious choices,
Right, in our daily lives.
we can all play a part
We can.
in creating a healthier planet.
Absolutely.
So you've heard a lot about those key environmental issues
Yeah.
and how they're all interconnected.
They are.
And while it can feel overwhelming,
It can.
the audio made it clear that there are a lot of potential solutions.
Yeah. And that's important to remember.
And that when we work together,
Yeah.
we can make a difference.
Absolutely.
So hopefully you have a clearer picture
Yeah.
of these topics.
I hope so.
And maybe some ideas to explore further, maybe check out some local environmental groups, look at some online resources.
Yeah.
Just pay more attention to environmental news.
Absolutely.
Now that you have this foundation.
Mhm.
But here's something to really think about.
Yeah.
What's one small change you could make in your life today
That's a great question.
to contribute to a more sustainable future?
Yeah, because those small actions,
Yeah,
when they're multiplied by millions of people, can have a significant impact.
they can. They really can.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
For this, look at the Everyday English Pod audio.
Yeah, it was a good one.
See you next time.
See you later.